Hey everybody, welcome back to Ask a VC. My name is Ryan Floyd. I'm a managing director at Storm Ventures. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to break down some technology concepts and really try to help you understand why some of these enterprise companies you read about are really changing the enterprise landscape. And today, we're going to start with automation. All right, let's get into it. So automation. So one of our companies, WORKATO, recently did a financing and is focused on automation. So I thought it was a great time to have Marcus Zern on, who runs business development and is head of strategy. Now, Marcus has got a lot of experience in the enterprise. He spent a number of years at Oracle, and then after that at Splunk before eventually joining WORKATO. In fact, he actually joined 2 years before I invested, and I was the first outside investor. So he really knows automation. So Marcus, welcome to Ask a VC. Let's just start with like a really just basic question to lay it out for everybody. You know, what is this idea of automation? We hear about this concept of RPA, we hear about, enterprise automation. Can you just kind of break it down for us and just put it in context, both historical and kind of, where we're at today with the tech?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, Ryan. Happy to talk about automation and, go back and how this all came about, how WORKATO came about. But actually, you introduced me as kind of having worked at Oracle and Splunk and so on. And actually my involvement in automation and business processes actually dates way back. So my first job out of college was in what was back then called BPR, Business Process Redesign. And so I was running around enterprises working for Booz Allen and Hamilton, a management consulting company, and by basically modeling processes. That's what I would do. So I would interview people to kind of understand how they did things in the company. And then I would create these kind of Visio diagrams that would document that business process. The idea of automation really is to take these business processes and take away as much manual work as possible, right? So the idea is the ideal business process would be something fully digitized, something that, is straight through processing, that, a customer basically just, puts in some data on a web form and then it really processes through all the system. That's in a way, a perfect business process. That's something that's probably the best possible experience for a customer. Just everything just gets done. A good automation platform helps you with this purpose. There are generations of automation tools. I mean, if you go back to the 90s when I did the BPR work, back then you modeled processes, and then there was actually someone else, a developer, who would then implement these processes. Either just using programming code or using some very old tool sets like integration platforms, ETL tools, business process management tools, that kind of stuff. And then you mentioned RPA. Lately, that has been a new kind of trend, if you want, to kind of think of automation almost as, mimicking a person's clicks on a screen with a solution, which is this RPA platform. You can call it an automation hack.
And Marcus, for automation, RPA, can you just tell everybody what does RPA stand for, and like how does that fit into the context of maybe what people thought of as automation back when you started compared to today?
So RPA stands for robotic process automation. It's a new way to automate. It's kind of a simpler way to do it. The idea is that you simulate a person's clicks on a screen. So that robot is basically mimicking the person, and it effectively takes all the keystrokes and the clicks on the screens and so simulates almost like a synthetic user on the screen. What's interesting from an IT perspective, it does multiple things. So first thing, which a lot of people like, it's easy to do. Right? So you don't have to get a developer, you just record those screen movements. It actually cuts out all the back office IT, all the APIs, all the infrastructure, all of that is cut out. Disadvantages would be it's hard to scale. It really is down to the speed of a person. It is harder to do a more complicated process. It's kind of more for smaller tasks.
So, and just for all of our listeners and viewers, it's not actually a robot. It's a script. We call it robotic process automation, but it's really a script that's automating, making that data entry just much easier to do. And so that's kind of at one end of the spectrum. The concept. So you've been in automation for a long time, and there's been a number of companies that have built significant businesses around what they would call automation over the years. Can you get everybody just a bit, sometimes it appears, I think, that these technical concepts come out of thin air and they just hit the scene. And often, it's more of an evolution that things, grow over time. And then there's things that happen out in the tech world, like the internet and the cloud, that make new advances possible. Can you kind of put automation in context? So what were some of those earlier companies that did automation, and what did it mean, 10 years ago, to do automation?
Right. I mean, there's been generations of automation for sure. I would put when in the late 80s, when integration tools started off, like something like a TIPCO or Informatica or something like that, the idea was always to remove manual steps, to move data from one system to another. What you didn't have back then is you didn't have the APIs that you have today.
And Marcus, can you explain for everybody really quick, what is an API?
Of course. So API stands for Application Programmable Interface. And it's really think of it as a mechanism that is built into these applications to be more easily integratable. You can use an application as a person by going to the screen and doing things. The idea of having the API is to effectively to automate, right? It's the idea that there's another door into the application where you don't have to go to the screen, but you can still do the kinds of things that you would do as a person. So you can, I guess, think of it like a remote control of that application.
So it's kind of like Legos, so you can build these applications together and get them to talk to one another easily.
That's a good way to think about it. The APIs would basically, if you're trying to automate a business process that has multiple applications and each application, has APIs, it's like the knobs on the Lego blocks, right? That lets you fit the multiple applications together.
So Marcus, what's a really simple example of automation, say 10 years ago, that viewers could understand, maybe with a payroll system or something that would sort of just kind of make it grounded in a real application use case?
Yeah, no, all right. So let's talk about automation examples or business process examples. I mean, the fundamental business processes haven't changed. Probably the two most common ones would be order to cash. So that basically means, from the time a customer, orders something, buys something, all the way through the systems until, you get the money and the customer gets the product shipped and so on. That would be order to cash. Another good one would be any kind of onboarding process. So, a new employee joins the company and then gets into all the different systems, or a new customer gets onboarded into the different kind of systems. So these processes, they are just still the same from yesterday to today. So you always had to integrate, for order to cash, for example, you had to integrate the CRM system with what's called the ERP system. So the customer relationship management system to the enterprise resource management system, ERP. or an onboarding, it would be from the HR system to like the identity system or the IT system, the IT help desk system. So those processes haven't changed. The kind of speed that you can do it in, the kind of agility and how you can make changes, the how intelligently you can doing this today, that has changed quite a bit.
So these enterprises have all these different systems then that control these really critical functions in terms of how they run their business, how they take orders, how they record those orders, how they manage their inventory. And to really connect them, you need some way to do this, and you can do it manually, which is once upon a time maybe they did that, but it's very labor intensive. It's probably prone to errors, I would imagine, because it's manual. And this is then where automation comes in, because it really connects all of these pieces then together.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So automation is about removing manual steps. People make mistakes. So a manual step is typically always a point in time where a mistake can be made. A manual step, takes time, so it kind of reduces the speed. You might have to wait for someone to make that manual step, maybe even like not right now, but tomorrow. And all of that affects the customer experience.
Right, because software doesn't care if it's 2:00 in the morning. It's happy to enter the logic at any time of day very quickly. That's a good point. Yeah. Well, let's pull. So to pull forward to today, you're at this really interesting company, WORKATO. Tell me, what's different now about what WORKATO does versus these companies, from several years ago. That can give viewers a sense of where the tech is headed today.
Yeah. So look, we in starting WORKATO, the idea was to kind of create a better platform, a new platform that was much more powerful, and powerful not just in an enterprise sense, but also in a easier to use kind of sense. And we all came with our experiences that we brought to the table. Like, I modeled business processes in the past. Vijay, our CEO, co-founded one of the first integration platform companies and so on. What we all looked into, we felt that the idea of automation and integration and so on was still very similar to what we knew back then, but the environment around us, all these business systems like CRM, ERP, and so on, they had actually changed dramatically. Salesforce was the first who came there and said, like, no more software, let's do this all in the cloud, let's make it much, much easier. Like, Salesforce was way easier than Siebel, for example. In the HR space, like Workday created a much better experience than what it used to be at PeopleSoft, for example. NetSuite brought financial systems in the cloud, but there wasn't anything that we felt matched that experience, that digital experience. So these processes that existed with the SaaS app, they were all kind of hidden in their own little silos, in their own little departments, but it was these, we call them operational processes or operational workflows, everything that the customer actually notices, experiences that cross multiple applications. You had like really old tools to do that. So the goal was really to say like, hey, how can we lift that into the modern world? How can we leverage, for example, the fact that everyone now has these APIs? If all these SaaS apps are in the cloud, why does your automation tool have to be on premise? That didn't make any sense. And so we kind of modernized what we knew and created that platform that we felt was, a path into the future to really digitize these companies effectively.
I mean, one really simple example that I've used in the past to explain sort of the idea is, today you can buy these smart outlets, and on your phone, You can set up triggers that can turn your lights on and off kind of when you want to. And I don't need to hire anyone to program my phone to do that, program the application. They make it really easy, for me to be able to do that, myself. So now when I go on vacation or whatever, I can set lights to go on off. I can control the temperature with all these kind of basic logic that's pretty simple to add. Now, obviously, WORKATO is much more complicated than that. But can you kind of use that analogy because I think without, WORKATO doesn't have an interface like Salesforce does. It's not as easy, I think, for many people to get their head around, like, what does it look like? Can you kind of just give people a sense of what does it look like in terms of, actually making it work in these kind of modern SaaS applications?
Sure. All right. Well, let's talk about WORKATO and what it looks like, and how WORKATO simplified, and improved in a way the automation of these business processes. And you refer to what we call a trigger, right? A lot of people, when they first look at WORKATO, they go like, "Oh, this looks like IFTTT for the enterprise. If this, then that for the enterprise." And it really comes down to the base unit of WORKATO, which we call a WORKATO recipe. A WORKATO recipe has a trigger that really kind of, it basically, you define when that recipe, that automation construct, when it should kick in. And so it listens to data, it listens to events in applications, it listens to exceptions that happen in the enterprise. And then it actually kicks off these, what we call actions. That's the other side of the recipe, so trigger and actions. And the actions is your business logic. It's the workflow logic, it's all the steps. It kind of looks like a business process, with branches and loops and all of those kind of things. But then it can actually access all your applications. It can access your SAP finance system. It can access your Salesforce system. It can access, a data warehouse. It can basically do all these things. And so if you think about it, that base unit of the recipe is kind of that automation Lego block. Again, as you mentioned before, it sounds simple. It's like, well, if you do this, then do these steps. But if you now put many of these recipes together, you can get amazing, models of these business processes. You have dependent recipes together, and each recipe is very, very powerful. So just to get you an idea, the scale. We just got certified by Snowflake, that data warehouse, that we can actually execute 500,000 starts of these recipes, 500,000 trigger events every single second with WORKATO for a given customer. So you get an idea. This isn't just for the home and your light bulb turning on and off. This can do big things, and we can connect to Salesforce really easily. Some people might think, yeah, that's not that hard. It's a SaaS application. It's got a beautiful API and so on. But we can do the very same thing if you have a SAP system from the 90s that's still running in your company, and it's behind the firewall and all of these things. We can access that just as well. WORKATO is built as an enterprise tool.
So with the recent financing, I think you all had the opportunity to get out and talk a lot more about your vision for the company and the product. And I think a lot of what you just mentioned goes a long way to this concept of like the intelligent enterprise and an enterprise OS, an operating system. And as most of our viewers know, we're all somewhat familiar with operating systems that run on our local computers like Mac OS or Windows. And tell me how you guys think about that enterprise OS in the WORKATO context.
Yeah, sure. So, look, the enterprise OS really came from the idea of contrasting enterprise IT and, your personal IT, which is your laptop. If you think of your laptop, you have applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, that kind of stuff. Just like the enterprise has the CRM, the ERP, the HR system. But on your laptop, there is an operating system. So that's like Windows or Linux or Mac OS. And it has all the tools in there to make all these applications work together. For example, you can copy and paste between different applications on your laptop. The operating system provides that. And then ever since, since a long time, in the 80s when the first Mac came out, right? The operating system has been easy to use. Every one of us can use it. You have your mouse and you drag and drop stuff. Today in the enterprise, it's still not that way. First of all, you don't have one OS. You have all these different tools. You have an integration platform. You have an ETL platform. You have a BPM platform. You have an RPA platform. And so it's hard, right? And at the same time, the Mac had it in the 80s. In the enterprise, in 2021, you still need developers to do those things. And so what we said is we're gonna build an enterprise OS, which is we're gonna build something like what you have on your laptop, but for your enterprise, which was missing. And it's something that feels like the Mac OS. It's easy to use and it combines all the pieces you need so that you can build really great customer experiences and employee experience across all your business systems.
Well, give me a couple of your favorite examples, like use cases, how customers are using it that can kind of ground everything we've just talked about with Workato in sort of reality for the viewers.
Okay, well, use cases is where it all comes alive, right? So let's talk about some Workato, some great automation use cases, and I would start simple, and just to see the before and after, let's pick something like crystal clear. I'll start. One of our customers is the government of New South Wales in Australia, largest state in Australia, and something that maybe every one of us can associate with. It's when you apply for a government service, before it was actually completely 100% manual. So you had to write letters, you had to call, and then came a website and Workato. And what Workato did is it took that website where people there submitted their forms, and it tied that website to all the systems in the background that the government had. That was a content management system, where all your information was stored. It was a Salesforce system where all the citizen information is in, and it's a financial system, SAP, where then you can actually do grants and provide subsidies or whatever it might be that people need. And so Workato turned that process in the government from 100% manual to 100% digital. And so that's pretty clear. What is the power? Now, sometimes it's not as crystal clear. I'll take one of our more modern customers. HubSpot is our customer. They provided customer success, and they had systems for that. They had Salesforce for that. They had a lot of information in Salesforce, but still, the customer success manager had to kind of look into the systems and had to identify situations when the customer needed help. It was a manual step to kind of find the right moment to interact. And so that's what Workato changed there. So we put in these Workato recipes, and there was a Snowflake data warehouse with all the customer information in there. And whenever some information deviated from a great customer journey, a Workato recipe would wake up and it would notify the customer success manager, and then it would automatically set all the right fields in your support app, in your marketing app, in your CRM app. And so it it wasn't like from totally manual to fully digital, but it kind of made them more data driven. It actually gave them some superpower, because before they needed a lot more customer success managers than after, because now they would be intelligently triggered, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it sounds like productivity would go up. I mean, they wouldn't have to hunt around for these events happening, and WORKATO just kind of ties it all together. I mean, it seems like you have to, if you believe that the enterprise is going to have lots of applications going forward, and there isn't going to be one single application vendor to sort of rule everybody, then there really needs to be some way, like with WORKATO, to be able to connect all these systems together. It seems like that is the future for virtually every single enterprise.
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, look, and your audience, I assume, is very well versed in SaaS and so on, and probably in the tech world. I mean, companies, we see companies with 700, 800 employees that have like 250 SaaS apps. It's absolutely, I mean, sounds somewhat ridiculous, but it is the reality today. And so I think the economics of SaaS really drive SaaS applications that are best of breed. I think you're rewarded as a SaaS company. I mean, you probably know that as an investor, right? If you build something that solves a certain specific need really, really well, and you go deep, I think that's when SaaS vendors become successful. And so, yeah, I think we see more and more SaaS applications out there. We see even like older companies, like when people transform their business, like MGM became a WORKATO customer recently. They went from SAP and basically writing a lot of custom applications. Now they still have SAP for financials, but now they have Salesforce for CRM and support. But then they also have vertical applications, like more media specific applications, like a royalty management, a media asset management kind of system. And all of these systems need to be held together. And frankly, you want these applications to talk to each other. You want, just like in the case of HubSpot, you want customer data that might not even be in an application that's in a data warehouse. You want to consider that as part of your operational workflows. And that's the kind of dirty little secret, right? The operational flow that really impacts the customer experience, like in order to cash or something like a support flow, they rarely just interface with one system. They always include multiple systems and data from multiple applications. So you gotta have something to face that reality.
I mean, I think everybody out there has heard about how important data is today. We're gathering so much data, but I think, like you just said, you have to be able to exchange it between all the different systems in order to really take advantage of the data that you have and you're creating. Because if you can't, then it just sits in a data warehouse and it isn't a lot of value there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, there is so much powerful data out there. I mean, what we see in SaaS companies, when we have a lot of SaaS companies as customers, product usage data, all that data that what people actually do with your product. I mean, it's super powerful, but if it just sits there and all you do is look at it, I mean, it's only worth so much. Now, if you have a platform, an automation platform like WORKATO, where you can, listen to certain patterns that you want to listen to, and then take that specific customer and then load it into a marketing campaign, a specific marketing campaign based on their product usage. Now that's very powerful, but you need a tool like WORKATO to do so. I mean, you have that with data, the fact that data is disparate and in silos is true more than ever before with all these SaaS applications, with like 200 plus SaaS applications. So you got to bring them together. Workato can do that. Now you have to then listen to that data when something happens. And we talked about that trigger concept. Workato can do that. And then the last thing is, often enough, people bring it into a data warehouse and then they put a Tableau or some kind of a BI tool on top and think, okay, well, we got our data all in one place. That's great. But what they still haven't done, they still haven't operationalized the data. They still haven't said like, okay, when this happens, then take that exception handling process. If this happens, then go to your CRM system and your HR system and put that data in. So that kind of getting to these operational, to these data-driven workflows, I think it's a huge opportunity out there.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Marcus, the future looks bright, and I appreciate you really spending a few minutes to really break down what automation is, because just independent of Workato, it is such a powerful trend in the enterprise. I think it's something anybody that really follows tech in the enterprise ought to be aware of. I really appreciate you spending the time and coming on with me, and I'm looking forward to the next chapter.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Yeah, I mean, I think we feel that it's an amazing opportunity in front of us. I mean, there's been all these attempts to kind of solve the problem, again, like integration platforms, but often they're too technical, or like RPA, and it seems good, but it doesn't scale. Or all kinds of things that have happened, and we really believe that with this unit of the recipe, we can make a real dent in how companies create an intelligent enterprise, how they can really affect and improve their operational workflows, and do it quite easily.
Well, obviously, I've made a substantial investment behind it, so I appreciate all the hard work and the time here. Thanks again, Marcus. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, well, everyone, thank you for watching another episode of Ask a VC on automation. It was a bit of a new idea to try to break down a technical concept that I think is really important to the future of the enterprise. And if it's interesting to you and you want to hear more videos like this, leave me a comment, hit subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, thank you.